One spilled glass of Merlot, that was all it took to unravel a decade of hiding. When a terrified waitress looked up into the cold, ruthless eyes of the city's most dangerous syndicate boss, she didn't just see a monster. She saw the boy she left behind 10 years ago. The private dining room at the Pierre in Manhattan was reserved for people whose bank accounts had more commas than a romance novel. Tonight, it was booked under the name Mr. Callahan, but everyone on the staff knew the truth. The heavily built men standing by the service doors, the absolute blackout on cell phones, and the manager's nervous sweating were dead giveaways. Stella Jenkins adjusted her stiff white apron, her hands trembling just enough to make the crystal glasses on her tray clink softly. She took a deep, steadying breath. Stella was 32, hailed from a sleepy suburb in Ohio, and was working double shifts to pay off a mountain of fictional student debt. That was the story she had repeated in the mirror every morning for the last 10 years. Her real name was Nora Gallagher, and 10 years ago she had died in a fiery car crash on the Brooklyn Bridge. Table 4 needs the 2010 Chateau Petrus decanted, Stella, hissed Philippe, the maître d'œuvre, his face pale. Do not speak to them unless spoken to. Do not make prolonged eye contact. And for the love of God, do not spill a drop. Understood, she murmured, taking the silver tray. She pushed through the heavy mahogany doors, immediately hit by the scent of expensive cigars, rich leather, and the dangerous hum of low voices. There were 6 men at the table, all dressed in bespoke suits that whispered quiet, lethal wealth. But the center of gravity in the room belonged undeniably to the man at the head of the table. He sat with his back to the sprawling view of Central Park, cloaked in shadows, half listening to a man with a scarred neck who was frantically whispering in his ear. Stella approached the table, keeping her eyes respectfully lowered. She set the tray on the serving stand and picked up the corkscrew. Her movements were mechanical, practiced. She popped the corks silently, the rich, earthy aroma of the vintage wine filling the space between them. Then the man at the head of the table shifted. He leaned forward into the soft glow of the chandelier to reach for his water glass. Stella froze. Her heart didn't just skip a beat. It violently seized in her chest. The air left her lungs in a sharp, agonizing rush. It was the jawline first sharp as cut glass, sparing a thin, faded white scar near the chin. Then the broad shoulders, the arrogant, effortless posture, and finally the dark, stormy eyes that had haunted her nightmares and daydreams for 3,650 days. Vincent Falcone. He wasn't the 20-year-old foot soldier she had fallen desperately in love with. He wasn't the bruised, bleeding boy who used to climb through her fire escape in Brooklyn. The boy was gone. In his place sat a ruthless, hardened king. He was the head of the Falcone syndicate, a man the evening news whispered about with terrifying reverence. Panic, absolute and blinding, consumed her. Her survival instinct screamed at her to drop the bottle and run out the service elevators, to pack her go-bag, to dye her hair, to disappear into the wind, just like she had a decade ago. He can't know, she thought wildly. My hair is blonde now. I've lost weight. I'm older. It's been 10 years. He thinks I'm dead. The wine, sweetheart. We're getting thirsty, one of the men barked, snapping his fingers. Startled, Stella's hand jerked. It happened in slow motion. The heavy glass decanter slipped from her clammy fingers. She lunged to catch it, but the momentum was too much. The decanter struck the edge of the table, shattering perfectly. A massive wave of dark crimson wine launched through the air, splashing directly onto Vincent Falcone's immaculate white dress shirt and slate-gray suit jacket. Silence crashed down on the room. It was absolute, suffocating, and heavy with the promise of violence. Chairs scraped violently against the floorboards. In unison, 3 of the men stood up, their hands slipping inside their jackets toward holstered weapons. A man to Vincent's left, a massive brute named Arthur, grabbed Stella by the wrist, his grip like a steel vise. "You stupid, clumsy bitch," Arthur snarled, his face twisting with rage. "Do you have any idea who—" "Arthur!" The voice was low, gravelly, and entirely calm. It cut through the room like a blade. Vincent Falcone didn't stand up. He didn't yell. He simply raised a single ringed hand. Instantly, Arthur released Stella's wrist and stepped back, bowing his head in submission. Stella couldn't breathe. She was rooted to the spot, staring at the spreading red stain on his chest, resembling a fatal gunshot wound. He slowly raised her eyes, fully expecting to meet the cold gaze of a killer about to order her execution. Instead, she found Vincent staring directly at her. His dark eyes locked onto hers, and time seemed to stop. She watched the subtle micro-expressions cross his face. First there was annoyance, then a sharp, piercing scrutiny. His eyes darted to the bridge of her nose, taking in the faint cluster of freckles. Her foundation hadn't quite covered. They dropped to the curve of her mouth and finally returned to her eyes. For a fraction of a second, the hardened Mafia boss vanished, and she saw the terrified, heartbroken 20-year-old boy staring back at her. The air in the room grew unspeakably tense. He knew. God help her, he knew. I am so incredibly sorry, sir," Stella stammered, forcing her voice into a higher, nervous pitch, desperate to maintain the illusion. "I will pay for the dry cleaning. I'll get you a towel immediately." Vincent didn't blink. He reached up, slowly unbuttoning his ruined jacket, never breaking eye contact. "Don't worry about the suit," Vincent said, his voice dropping to a register that only she could hear over the hum of the room. It sent a violent shiver down her spine. "It's not the first time you've left me bleeding, is it?" Stella's blood turned to ice. She staggered back half a step, entirely forgetting the broken glass at her feet. The crunch of crystal under her sensible black shoes sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. I don't know what you mean, sir," she whispered, her voice trembling genuinely now. She hastily grabbed a linen napkin from her apron and began trying to blot the wine off the table, avoiding his gaze. "I'll send manager in right away. Please excuse me." She turned to flee, but before she could take 2 steps, Vincent's voice stopped her dead in her tracks. "If you walk out that door, I will have my men burn this restaurant to the ground with everyone inside," he said casually, picking up a cloth napkin to dab his own chest. "You stay. You serve us for the rest of the night. Only you." The manager, Philippe, burst through the double doors at that exact moment, having seen the disaster through the small porthole window. He was practically vibrating with terror. "Mr. Callahan, I am so profoundly sorry." Philippe gasped, shoving Stella aside. "She is new. She is incompetent. She is fired immediately. I will bring you a fresh shirt on the house, and our finest bottle of 'The Girl' stays." Vincent interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. He finally looked away from Stella to pin the manager with a dead-eyed stare. "If she is fired, if she is replaced, or if she leaves this room for any reason other than to fetch my food, you will have a very short, very unpleasant evening. Are we clear?" Philippe swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Crystal clear, sir." He turned to Stella, his eyes wide with warning. "Take care of the gentleman." Philippe scurried out. The bodyguard slowly sat back down. The conversation around the table resumed, forced and hushed, but the atmosphere had irrevocably changed. For the next 2 hours, Stella lived in a waking nightmare. Every time she approached the table to clear a plate, pour water, or serve the Wagyu steaks, she could feel Vincent's eyes tracking her every movement. He watched the way her hands shook. He watched the way she bit the inside of her cheek when she concentrated, a nervous habit she had never been able to break. The proximity was tortuous. It brought a tidal wave of suppressed memories crashing back into her consciousness. Brooklyn, 2016. She was 18, hiding in the rain under the rusted awning of an abandoned bodega. Vincent had found her there, his knuckles bruised and bleeding after a street fight with a rival crew. He had pulled her into his jacket to keep her warm, resting his chin on the top of her head. "When I get out of this life, Nora," he had promised, his voice rough with exhaustion, I'm taking you to California. We'll buy a house near the water. Nobody will ever touch you, I swear to God. But he couldn't get out. His father, the ruthless Don Falcone, had discovered their secret romance. To the Don, Nora wasn't a girl. She was a weakness, a vulnerability that rival families could exploit. One night, Nora overheard the Don ordering a hit on her. It was supposed to look like a mugging gone wrong. She knew Vincent would go to war against his own father to protect her, a war that would get him killed. So she did the only thing she could to save his life. She wrote a suicide note, left her shoes on the edge of the Brooklyn Bridge, and vanished into the night, letting the world and Vincent believe she had jumped into the dark, freezing waters below. She had sacrificed everything to keep him safe, and now, seeing what he had become, the cold, calculating monster sitting at this table, she wondered if she had made the biggest mistake of her life. "Tell me about yourself, Stella," Vincent said suddenly, cutting through the low hum of the table's conversation. He pushed his half-eaten steak away. Stella paused, holding an empty silver tray against her chest like a shield. "There's nothing much to tell, sir. I'm just a waitress." "Everyone has a story," Vincent replied smoothly, leaning back in his chair. The dark wine stain on his shirt looked like a gaping wound. "Where are you from? Ohio?" She lied smoothly, the fabricated backstory rolling off her tongue. "Moved here a few years ago, just trying to make a living in the city." "Lots." One of his lieutenants, a sharply dressed man named Thomas, chuckled darkly. "Ohio? You don't sound like you're from Ohio, sweetheart. You sound like you got a little bit of Brooklyn hidden in there." Stella's breath hitched. People pick up accents when they live here long enough. Vincent's eyes darkened, a flash of genuine anger breaking through his calm facade. "And your family, they must miss you in Ohio." "They're dead," Stella said quietly. It was a half-truth. Her parents had passed away when she was young, which was why she had been alone in Brooklyn in the first place. Vincent fell silent. He stared at her for a long, agonizing moment, his jaw tight, the muscle in his cheek feathered. "Tragic," he murmured finally. "It's a terrible thing to lose someone you love, to have them ripped away from you. It changes a person, turns them into something else entirely." The double meaning in his words struck her like a physical blow. He wasn't talking about her family. He was talking about himself. He was telling her that she had created the monster sitting before her. "Dessert will be out shortly," Stella whispered, turning sharply and practically fleeing to the kitchen. When the dinner finally ended, the men filed out of the private room like silent specters. Stella hid in the service pantry until she was sure the coast was clear. When she finally emerged to clear the wreckage of the table, her legs felt like lead. The room was empty, smelling of spilled wine and expensive aftershave. She walked over to the head of the table where Vincent had sat. There, resting on top of a crisp folded linen napkin, was a towering stack of $100 bills. It had to be at least $10,000. Stella's heart hammered against her ribs. With trembling hands, she picked up the stack of money. Beneath it, written in bold black ink on the white napkin, was a single sentence. "Did you really think a dye job and a fake name would hide you from me, Nora? Go to the alley out back, now, or I send my men to the Ohio address listed on your fake ID." She dropped the napkin as if it burned her. He didn't just know who she was. He had somehow already run a background check on her alias while eating his steak. The realization was terrifying. She was trapped. Taking a shaky breath, Stella untied her apron, dropping it onto the floor amidst the shattered glass of the wine decanter. There was nowhere left to run. The heavy steel service door of the Pierre closed behind her with a definitive, echoing thud, sealing her fate. Outside on East 61st Street, the city was weeping. A cold, miserable November rain had begun to fall, slicking the cobblestones and washing the alley in the harsh, neon glow of a nearby street lamp. Stella knew she was Nora again. There was no point in hiding it anymore. Wrapped her arms around her thin blouse, shivering from a combination of the freezing downpour and sheer terror. The sleek black Mercedes Maybach Pullman was idling silently in the shadows. Standing beside it, completely ignoring the rain soaking his ruined, wine-stained suit, was Vincent. The massive bodyguard Arthur stood a few paces away, his hand resting casually inside his coat. At a sharp nod from his boss, Arthur retreated into the darkness, leaving them completely alone. Vincent took a slow drag from a cigarette, the cherry flaring bright red in the gloom. He exhaled a long plume of smoke, his eyes never leaving hers. "You didn't jump," he said. "It wasn't a question." The raw gravel in his voice scraped against her nerves. Nora swallowed hard, the taste of copper flooding her mouth. "You knew?" "I found your shoes on the bridge," he replied, taking a slow step toward her. The predatory grace of his movement made her heart pound wildly against her ribs. "I stood on that ledge for 3 hours, Nora. I stared into the East River and I planned to jump right in after you. I wanted to die. I practically begged God to let me drown so I wouldn't have to live in a world where you didn't exist." Tears pricked Nora's eyes, blending with the cold rain streaming down her face. "Vincent, but then," he interrupted, his voice turning dangerously quiet, "I paid a visit to an NYPD traffic detective on my father's payroll. I had him pull the unreleased security footage from the Brooklyn Bridge cameras, the ones the public doesn't know about. And I watched you. I watched you place your shoes on the ledge, cry for exactly 2 minutes, and then walk down the pedestrian path toward Manhattan." Nora's breath hitched. She backed up until her shoulders hit the wet, cold brick of the alley wall. "If you knew I was alive, why didn't you come for me?" "For 10 years, Vincent, I slept with a kitchen knife under my pillow. I worked graveyard shifts under a dead woman's social security number. Why did you let me believe you hated me?" Vincent closed the distance between them. He was so close now she could smell the rich tobacco, the rain, and the faint, coppery scent of the Petrus wine she had spilled on his chest. He reached out, his large, scarred hand hovering inches from her face, before he gently tucked a wet strand of blonde hair behind her ear. The touch was agonizingly tender for a man who ruled a criminal empire, because my father had already paid a hitman named Tommy Graziano $50,000 to put a bullet in the back of your head, Vincent whispered, his eyes flashing with a dark, violent storm. "If I came looking for you, he would have followed me right to your doorstep. You leaving, faking your death. It was the only thing that bought me time." "Time for what?" Nora asked, her voice trembling. "Time to dismantle my father's empire from the inside out," Vincent stated coldly. "It took me 3 years to find Tommy Graziano and bury him under the foundation of a new high-rise in Queens. It took me another 5 years to systematically strip my father of his capos, his money and his power. And it took me until last year to finally take the throne for myself." "Not..." Nora stared at him, horrified and captivated. The boy she loved had ripped apart the most feared syndicate in New York, all to carve out a safe space in the world for her. "So why now?" she breathed. "Why show up tonight? Did you just want to see if I was suffering?" Vincent's jaw tightened. He dropped the cigarette, crushing it beneath his expensive Italian loafer. "I didn't come here tonight to gloat, Nora. I came here because your cover is blown, and we have exactly 3 minutes before this alley turns into a war zone." Before Nora could process the words, the deafening screech of tires tore through the night. At the mouth of the narrow alleyway, the deafening screech of heavy tires tore through the miserable November night. 2 unmarked, blacked-out SUVs slammed on their brakes, their front bumpers angled aggressively to completely box in the Maybach. Blinding high-beam halogen headlights cut through the torrential rain, illuminating the cobblestones in a harsh, unforgiving glare. "Sit down!" Vincent roared, the calm syndicate boss vanishing in a fraction of a second, replaced entirely by the street-hardened brawler from Brooklyn. He lunged forward without a moment's hesitation. His large body collided with Nora's, wrapping his arms around her waist and tackling her violently to the wet, freezing asphalt just as the night erupted. The sharp, rapid, crack hot of automatic gunfire echoed off the brick buildings, a deafening mechanical roar that vibrated in Nora's teeth. Above them, the heavy reinforced glass of the Maybach's passenger windows groaned under the impact before shattering, raining sharp, glittering diamonds of safety glass down onto their heads and shoulders. Nora screamed, a raw, primal sound of absolute terror, covering her ears as the concussive force of the gunfire shook her to her core. She could smell the acrid stench of burning gunpowder mixing with a metallic scent of wet trash and rain. Arthur's suppressive fire pinned them down and get the girl in the car. Vincent shouted over the chaotic din, his voice a commanding thunderclap. From the shadows near the rear bumper of the Maybach, Arthur emerged like an absolute titan of war. He hoisted a heavy tactical submachine gun from beneath his overcoat and unleashed a relentless, sweeping barrage of bullets toward the blocking SUVs. The brilliant stroboscopic flash of Arthur's muzzle illuminated the alley in jagged bursts of yellow light, forcing the attackers, 4 men wearing dark tactical masks and heavy body armor, to scramble frantically for cover behind their reinforced engine blocks. "Move! Now! Now!" "Don't look back," Vincent commanded. He hauled Nora to her feet by her waist, his body deliberately angled to act as a human shield between her and the storm of incoming lead. He shoved her forcefully toward the open, heavy, armor-plated door of the Pullman. Nora scrambled wildly into the back seat, her wet, sensible black waitress shoes slipping on the rich imported leather. She tumbled across the seats and turned back, gasping for air, just in time to see Vincent raise his own weapon, a sleek, matte black Glock he had drawn seemingly out of thin air. He fired methodically into the blinding headlights, his face a mask of lethal concentration. Suddenly Vincent let out a sharp, choked grunt. His broad frame jerked violently to the side as the unmistakable, sickening sound of a bullet tearing through flesh reached Nora's ears. A spray of crimson mist exploded from his left shoulder, splattering against the edge of the car door. "Vincent!" Nora screamed, her heart stopping completely in her chest, ignoring the high-caliber round that had just ripped through his muscle and bone. Vincent threw himself into the back seat beside her. He used his good arm to pull the massively heavy armored door shut, the latch engaging with a definitive sealing click. Instantly, the terrifying roar of the alley shootout became muffled, the bulletproof cabin of the Maybach absorbing the secondary impacts with dull, heavy thuds. "Drive, Dominic, drive, drive." Vincent barked at the driver through the lowered privacy partition, his voice tight with pain. "FDR Drive, north. Get us to Teterboro Airfield. Do whatever it takes." The massive, twin-turbo V12 engine of the Pullman roared to life like a wakened beast. Dominic, a stone-faced wheelman who had survived a dozen cartel wars, threw the massive vehicle into reverse. The Maybach smashed violently into the front grille of the blocking SUV with a horrifying crunch of metal, forcing the lighter vehicle out of the way. With a sickening burn of rubber, Dominic threw the car into drive and tore out of the alley, drifting dangerously onto the slick, rain-swept streets of Manhattan. In the dimly lit back seat, Nora was hyperventilating, the edges of her vision going black. She tore the white silk scarf from her neck, a cheap accessory she wore to hide a birthmark, and lunged toward him. Her hands were immediately covered in his warm, dark blood as she pressed the balled-up silk hard against the gaping wound on his left shoulder. "You're shot," she sobbed hysterically, blind panic clawing at her throat. "Oh my God, Vincent. You're bleeding out." "We need a hospital." "I'm fine, Nora," Vincent gritted out. He leaned his head back against the plush headrest, his face draining of color, yet his dark, intense eyes remained fixed firmly on her face. He reached up with his right hand, his heavy, ringed fingers wrapping securely over her trembling hands as she held the makeshift tourniquet. It passed clean through the deltoid. I've had worse paper cuts from reading my father's ledgers. Who were they? Nora demanded, her voice breaking into a ragged sob as the streetlight strobed through the rain-streaked windows. Why are they after me? I've been a ghost for 10 years. The Moretti family, Vincent said heavily, his breathing becoming shallow and labored. Last Tuesday you applied for a new apartment lease in Stuyvesant Town. You used your alias, but the leasing office requires a digital photo for their security system. That photo hit a facial recognition algorithm on a dark web database run by a Moretti cartel hacker. Nora felt the world spinning violently off its axis. Her meticulous, careful 10-year life, her endless paranoia, her cash-only existence, all of it unraveled by a simple, standard apartment application. They didn't know you were Nora Gallagher, Vincent continued, his thumb gently stroking her blood-stained knuckles. But they knew you looked exactly like the dead girl the Falcone boss used to love. To them, you were the ultimate ghost. They came tonight to take you hostage, to lock you in a basement and use you as leverage to strip my territories. They wanted to skin the only thing I ever cared about. Nora stared down at her hands, pressing harder against his shoulder. What happens now? She whispered, the fight completely draining out of her. I can't run again, Vincent. I don't have the strength to build another fake life. I don't have anywhere else to go. Vincent turned his head, his dark, stormy eyes softening in a profound, earth-shattering way that she hadn't seen since they were kids sitting on a fire escape in Brooklyn. Slowly, wincing through the agonizing pain in his shoulder, he reached into the inner pocket of his ruined, wine-soaked suit jacket. He pulled out a folded piece of thick, heavy, watermarked parchment. It was slightly stained with the spilled Chateau Petrus and a fresh smear of his own blood. He placed it gently onto her lap. Nora let go of his shoulder with one hand to unfold the document. Her fingers were shaking so violently the paper rattled. It was a property deed, finalized and notarized. It detailed the outright purchase of a sprawling multi-million-dollar private estate, located on a secluded cliffside in Carmel-by-the-Sea, California. But what made the breath catch permanently in her throat was the ownership line. It wasn't an LLC, it wasn't an alias. It wasn't Stella Jenkins. The deed was listed entirely under the name Nora Falcone. I told you 10 years ago, Vincent rasped, his eyelids fighting to stay open as the adrenaline finally began to crash, leaving him pale and exhausted. I promised you a house near the water. I promised nobody in this godforsaken world would ever touch you again. The jet is fueled and waiting on the tarmac at Teterboro. We leave tonight. Nora stared at the blood-stained paper, heavy tears finally spilling over her eyelashes, dropping onto the ink. He had done it. He had waded through a decade of unspeakable violence, blood, and darkness, systematically destroying his own father's empire from the inside out, all just to build the escape hatch he had promised her when they were teenagers. Your syndicate, Nora whispered, looking up at him in absolute awe and heartbreak. You're the Don. You rule the city. You're really leaving it all behind? For me? Vincent smiled weakly, a genuine boyish smile that wiped 10 years of cruelty from his handsome face. He pulled her close against his uninjured side, burying his face into her damp blonde hair as the glittering, violent skyline of Manhattan blurred past the bulletproof windows, fading into the rearview mirror forever. There is no empire on this earth worth ruling, Nora, he whispered, his voice a fierce, unbreakable vow in the darkness. If you aren't sitting beside me, did Vincent's ultimate sacrifice and unwavering loyalty blow you away? 10 years of hiding, a mafia war, and a shattered wine glass led to the most explosive reunion ever. If this heart-pounding mafia romance kept you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button. Share this story with your friends who love a dark romance twist, and don't forget to subscribe for more intense real-life drama stories.